In every city, there are streets the streetlights forget. Places where the fog doesn't lift, it settles. Into the bones. Into the records. Into cases no one wants reopened. They told her it would be simple. Walk in. Walk out. Don't look back. But nothing in this world stays buried. And everyone looks back, eventually. Some crimes don't end when the sirens fade. They send out waves. Through testimony. Through memory. Through the people who survive them. They reverberate.
Help me.
This is one of those cases. This is reverberating noir.
There is a room on Thomas Street, second floor. The candles have burned low, and somewhere in the dark, between the smell of perfume and the first thin curl of smoke, a woman's life is ending. Her name was Helen Jewett, and in the spring of 1836, New York City would learn her name, mourn her, debate her, and ultimately abandon her.
What makes this case so haunting isn't just the crime itself. It's everything the crime revealed. About power, about class, about whose story gets told and whose gets buried.
Literally buried. In an unmarked grave.
Exactly, and we're going to walk through all of it today.
Welcome to Reverberating Noir. I'm Adam Jones.
And I'm Nina Jovovich, and this is the story of Helen Jewett.
To understand who Helen Jewett was, you have to go back to who she wasn't. She wasn't born Helen Jewett, she was born Dorcas Doyen, around 1813. Augusta, Maine. A small, cold, unremarkable town for a girl with a very remarkable mind.
The details of her early life are genuinely hard to pin down. Most of what we have comes filtered through newspaper accounts that were, to put it generously, not exactly objective. But what we do know is this. She was poor, she was bright, and she was noticed.
A local judge named Nathan Weston took her in. Later, a merchant named Isaac Child. They gave her an education. They gave her books, language, refinement. They thought they were giving her a future.
And in a way, they were. Just not the one they imagined.
By her mid-teens, Dorcas had walked away from the respectable life those men had mapped out for her. She took work in a Portland hotel, and not long after that, she entered the world of commercial sex. By 1830, she had moved to Boston. She had a new city, a new image, and a new name. Helen Jewett.
That name change matters more than it might seem. It wasn't just a pseudonym, it was an act of self-construction. She was building a persona, intelligent, sophisticated, fashionable. She was positioning herself deliberately within a profession that had its own rigid class hierarchy.
She read novels, she read poetry, she dressed well. In the world she inhabited, that set her apart. By 1834, she had arrived in New York City. And New York, at that moment, was exploding. Commerce, ambition, money, vice, all of it pouring into the same narrow streets. She found her place in a series of high-end brothels, the most notable of which was run by a woman named Rosina Townsend, 41 Thomas Street.
And I want to pause on that word high-end because it matters for context. These weren't the squalid, desperate places people imagine when they think of 19th century sex work. They were discreet, well-furnished. Controlled environments where wealthy merchants and ambitious young clerks could socialize, drink, and feel important. Helen wasn't at the bottom of that world. She was near the top of it.
And then she met Richard Robinson. He was 19 years old, a dry goods clerk. Handsome, charming, and by all accounts drawn to Helen in a way that went beyond a simple transaction.
He became a regular at Thomas Street. And letters that were later published in the press, their authenticity was fiercely debated. I'll come back to that, suggested something more complicated. Jealousy, possessiveness, the kind of emotional intensity that doesn't stay contained.
Whatever it was between them, it ended on the night of the 9th of April, 1836. Rosina Townsend later said she had arranged supper for the two of them that evening, Helen and Robinson, in her room, second floor. At some point, the supper ended and the door closed.
And sometime before 3 a.m, Townsend said she saw a figure leaving the building, wrapped in a cloak, moving quickly, gone.
Then came the smoke. A woman named Maria Stevens, who roomed right next to Helen, woke to the smell of it. She raised the alarm. The household stirred. The police and watchmen arrived, and when they broke down the locked door to Helen's room, the bed was on fire, and Helen Jewett was lying on it.
She had been struck in the head, at least 3 times, with a hatchet. The fire had been set deliberately meant to consume the evidence, the body, the room, all of it. It didn't finish the job.
The hatchet was found at the scene, and so was a cloak. A distinctive cloak, one that was quickly identified as belonging to Richard Robinson.
He was arrested almost immediately, and on paper, the case looked airtight. The hatchet was traced back to his employer's store. Multiple witnesses placed him at the brothel that night. The cloak was his. Rosina Townsend had seen him leave. The evidence was stacking up in one direction.
And then the penny press got involved.
Which changed everything.
James Gordon Bennett, editor of the New York Herald. He didn't just cover this story, he became part of it. He visited the crime scene himself. He interviewed Robinson in jail. He published intimate, lurid details about Helen's life, her room, the night of the murder. It was a new kind of journalism, aggressive, personal, and wildly popular.
And deeply influential in shaping public perception before the trial even began. That's the part that can't be overstated. The press wasn't just reporting the story, it was constructing it. And depending on which paper you read, you got a very different version of who Helen Jewett was.
Robinson was not without resources. His employer and a circle of wealthy, well-connected young men, some of whom were almost certainly also clients of that same brothel, rallied around him. They hired a formidable legal team, and they walked into that courtroom with a strategy.
And the strategy was brutal. Step 1, attack the victim. They painted Helen not as a woman who had been murdered, but as a scheming, jealous, vengeful prostitute who had fabricated or exaggerated the relationship with Robinson. They introduced letters, supposedly written by Helen, designed to make her look obsessive and dangerous. Whether those letters were genuine, nobody could say for certain.
Step 2. Attack the witnesses.
Rosina Townsend, Maria Stevens, the other women of the brothel. The defense argued, essentially, that these women were immoral by nature, and therefore their testimony simply could not be trusted. A conspiracy of disreputable women trying to destroy a promising young man. That was the narrative they sold.
And step 3, offer an alternative.
There had been another man seen with Helen earlier that evening. The defense pointed to that. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was a former lover. Maybe it was anyone other than Richard Robinson. Just enough doubt. Just a sliver. That was all they needed.
And here's what I keep coming back to, Nina. The prosecution's entire case rested on the testimony of women that the defense had already spent weeks destroying in the press. Before the jury even sat down, before a single word was spoken in that courtroom, the damage was done.
That's the mechanism, isn't it? It wasn't just a legal strategy, it was a cultural one. You don't have to prove a man innocent if you can make the jury believe the victim deserved what happened to her, or that she was too immoral to be believed, or that her life simply wasn't worth the weight of a verdict.
If you're finding this story as compelling and as troubling as we do, this is exactly what reverberating noir is here for. Cases that go deeper than the crime, stories that ask harder questions. Hit subscribe and join us. Every episode, we go further. Now back to 1836. On the 8th of June, 1836, after a trial that lasted only a few days, the jury deliberated for less than an hour. Not guilty.
Less than an hour. For a woman beaten to death with a hatchet, her room set on fire, her body left to burn. Less than an hour.
The city fractured. Some people celebrated. A young man of good standing saved from the scheming of immoral women. Others were furious. And rightly so.
Because what they had just witnessed wasn't really a trial. It was a demonstration. A demonstration of exactly how the system worked and who it worked for. Money, connections, the right friends in the right places. And on the other side, a woman whose profession had already been used to erase her humanity in the eyes of the law.
Richard Robinson left New York. He moved to Texas. He changed his name. And he lived out the rest of his days in quiet anonymity. The real killer of Helen Jewett, if the law ever had the wrong man, was never found, never identified, never held to account.
What this case did and why it still matters is that it laid bare the architecture of injustice in a way that was impossible to ignore. The penny press made Helen famous. But fame and justice are two very different things. She got one, she never got the other.
There's something that stays with me about this case. Helen Jewett built herself from nothing, from poverty and obscurity in a small Maine town. She educated herself. She cultivated a life, not the life anyone handed her, but one she chose. And the world that benefited from her, the men who visited her, the press that profited from her death, the jury that freed her killer, that same world decided she wasn't worth protecting. She was buried in an unmarked grave. A final silence in a life and a death that had been so loudly, so relentlessly narrated by everyone but her.
And that's the part that lingers. Not just who killed Helen Jewett, but how many systems, legal, social, journalistic, had to work together in perfect coordination to make sure it didn't matter. That's not an accident. That's a structure. And structures like that don't disappear on their own.
Thank you for spending this time with us. If this episode moved you, challenged you, or made you think that's what Reverberating Noir is built for, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. Tell us what you're thinking. These stories deserve to be heard, and the people inside them, they deserve to be remembered. I'm Adam Jones.
And I'm Nina Jovovich. We'll see you in the dark.
And so the file closes. But the case doesn't. Not for the families. Not for the witnesses who still pause before answering questions. Not for a city that remembers, even when it pretends not to. The evidence sits somewhere in a box. The photographs fade. The names are spoken less often. But the echoes remain. If this story stayed with you, if you felt that silence at the end of each unanswered question, subscribe to the channel. Not for us. For the stories that never got a second look. For the voices that were cut short. For the cases that refuse to stay buried. Because the truth doesn't disappear. It waits.
And as long as the questions are still unanswered, the case isn't over. It's just waiting for someone to look again.
And here, it keeps reverberating.